I am Elizabeth Koenig. When Pastor David knew that he was going to be away, he asked me to preach for this Sunday and next Sunday. With all that has been happening in our nation and the world, not to speak of challenges in my own life, I wonder more than ever where Jesus is, or whether the question is even relevant. Where is Jesus for me, and where is Jesus for you? Is he up in heaven, or dead and decomposed like every other living creature after it dies? Sometimes we say that we feel Jesus in our hearts, or see him when we feed the food insecure, or hear his voice in worship, hymns, and prayers. Or maybe we just think that we will see Jesus after we die, but not before. But we don't need to settle for waiting until then, because there is abundant and varied instruction about how to find Jesus in the Gospels, the epistles, the saints, the mystics, and the theologians. Take courage, for example, from Origen, the great 3rd century theologian who said, "Those who are searching for Jesus should not do so negligently, casually, or just now and then, because consequently they will be unable to find him." Then Origen shows that people can and do find Jesus when they look for him, and everyone's discovery is as individual and unique as their faces are. The disciples and St. Paul give two kinds of evidence. First, the disciples. They've fished all night from their boat. Now it is dawn, and a fierce wind blows hard against them. Exhausted, but fearing they will capsize, they row as hard as they can. All at once, a figure approaches, walking on waves. It looks like a ghost. Simon Peter and Andrew, James and John are terrified. They call out. Immediately, Jesus speaks, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Then he gets into the boat with them, and the wind ceases. Where is Jesus for these weary, superstitious men? Jesus is right there with them, on the waves and in the boat, not a ghost, but an enfleshed person, as humanly real as they are. Second, St. Paul, who, like the disciples, feels terror for his life. 3 times fierce winter storms wreck his ship, one time stranding him for days at sea. He is whipped, thrown into jail, starved, despised, humiliated, accused of being a fake, rejected by the very people he feels called to minister to. In 2 Corinthians 4, which we just heard, Paul sums up what he's been through. He says, "We," meaning himself, "we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying around in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies." We may have reservations about Paul. Many people do. But we share something important in common with him. Like us today, Paul never saw or met Jesus when he walked the earth. Nevertheless, Paul knows Jesus, and his writings speak extensively about how to find Jesus in the here and now. Through conflicts, trials, and near death, Paul goes through a learning process. He actually has to learn how Jesus is present with him. Where is Jesus in the world today? Asking this question is neither silly, philosophical, nor irrelevant, because more folks feel the need for his presence than ever before. Warming oceans give rise to hurricanes, tornadoes, and fierce winds. Flooding submerges coastal areas. People and islands are lost. Fires consume forests. Moreover, poverty and famine aggravate conflicts. Hatred, racism, sexism, and wars intensify worldwide. As we approach our national election, political divisions intensify. Who feels safe? Who among Christians can feel indifferent about where Jesus is amidst all these calamities? Personally, I need to know where Jesus is, because I believe that his presence gives life, even where it looks as though life is dwindling away. Years ago, I designed and conducted a study of women leaders, how they discerned and made decisions during crisis situations, and how their people responded to them. I did this because I knew about current discussions about leadership, that is, whether good leaders are forcefully authoritarian according to the old models, or more egalitarian, empathic, and facilitating. I was highly motivated to do this because at the time, my colleagues and I were enduring low morale under an authoritarian, capricious, and ultimately ineffectual leader. I believed there had to be a better way. To design the study, I consulted the dean of a business school, several CEOs, and a sociologist. Not all leaders in my study were women of faith. Praying was unfamiliar to some of them. However, one Christian woman who had been caught up in a long and big, serious crisis spoke to me about her fear. She said, "It would be a facile thing to say that I prayed the fear away." Another woman leader said, "When you realize what is being required of you, first you cry." When we look at our troubled world and our complicity, our responsibility, it is perhaps not a bad thing if first we cry. Buddhist Joanna Macy insists that mourning is the first step in overcoming denial and feeling our grief about nuclear proliferation and climate change. She believes that only deep mourning energizes action. Paul would agree that saying we can pray our fear away would be a facile thing, and he is no advocate for denial. Paul's prayer in the midst of crises is arduous. Even though he believes he is not alone because the Spirit is with him, the Spirit who intercedes with groanings too deep for words, Paul is not without fear. But then something miraculous happens. Paul recognizes that Jesus is with him too. He feels Jesus with him, no matter what suffering, conflict, or crisis he goes through. Paul discovers, in addition, something important about his own self. Yes, he is one whole, united person, body and soul, as his Jewish faith teaches, but he is also free to respond to his experiences under two aspects. There is the outer perspective, which, as he tells his readers, has been afflicted, perplexed, persecuted, and struck down. And there is the inner perspective, which is not crushed, not driven to despair, not forsaken, not destroyed. Paul famously calls these two aspects the outer person and the inner person. On first hearing this, we might think that Paul is simply another Stoic, like the ancient Greek philosophers Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, or Epictetus. Stoicism is the ability to endure pain or trouble without complaining or showing emotions. Don't complain, don't explain, sailors and soldiers say, gritting their teeth. But Stoicism isn't Paul's philosophy at all. For one thing, he complains a lot. Paul's experience is different. The intensity, the incandescence of his relationship with Jesus Christ, crucified, dead, then risen from the dead, draws Paul like a magnet into a new dimension of living. Now, Jesus is present to him because Paul has become fully present to Jesus, present to all dimensions of Jesus' personality and experience. Paul sees that he does indeed carry the death of Jesus around in his body, meaning those afflictions, those threats of annihilation. But at the same time, he also carries in his own body that he calls a cracked clay pot with a thorn in its flesh, Jesus' risen life. This is presence with a capital P. There never could be a stronger, truer, more existentially felt sense of Jesus' presence than this. Paul's discovery of the outer person and the inner person is important. He is an original thinker, and his view of the human being differs from the Greek philosophy of his day. His finding goes on to influence theologians from the patristic era up until now. For Paul, outer and inner are equivalent terms. He does not value one over the other. Meister Eckhart in the 14th century may have been thinking of something similar when he insisted that Mary and Martha must unite. Mary, the contemplative sister of Lazarus, who always sits at Jesus' feet, lapping up every word, and Martha, the active sister, who has to be serving others all the time instead of listening to him. Mary and Martha must unite. The uniting of inner and outer in Paul gives rise to a profound and experiential identification with Jesus' dying and rising. The result is a luminous, mirroring relation to Jesus that transformed Paul and can transform us as well. In 2 Corinthians 3:18, he writes, "All of us, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image, from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord, the Spirit." All of us, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. Where is Jesus? He is right here with us, walking the waves of our nation's stormy electoral sea, entering this collective boat with us and calming the wind. He is with us in our personal afflictions, perplexities, fears of diminishing abilities, and death. Jesus did not come to explain away suffering or remove it. He came to fill it with his presence. And what about those women leaders in their crises? Even the most extroverted among them, the politicians, the technicians, the CEOs and CFOs, discovered within themselves a strength they had not known before and that surprised them. This inner woman was strong, hard, and clear as a diamond, like Teresa of Avila's interior castle, transparent to light and truth. A character in Ntozake Shange's play for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough expresses this powerfully. I found God in myself, and I loved her. I loved her fiercely. And I did too. So, we do not lose heart, Paul says. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed every day. Because we carry both the death and the life of Jesus in our bodies, we can take to our hearts the words of Jesus himself. I am with you always, even to the end of the ages. Amen.